Hello everybody. Welcome to Introduction to Sociology, and this is Lecture 4, Sociological Methods. In this short lecture, we're going to go over a few different things. We're going to look at the scientific research method, scientific methods in general, particularly the survey. We're going to look at the benefits and pitfalls of the survey, some methodological concerns, and some closing remarks. But I want to start this lecture with asking the question, who is the sociologist? The mid-20th century scholar Peter Berger stated that the sociologist is someone who is concerned with understanding society in a disciplined way. And that discipline comes from the ways in which that sociologist studies society, studies individuals, groups, interactions, institutions, and so forth. However, recently there's been a lot of different complaints and criticisms about sociology in particular, and academia in general. And most of that criticisms and complaints come from different political ideologies. So in the United States, conservative people with conservative ideologies usually and more recently say that sociologists or that academia in general is negative. And there's a lot of reasons for this. They're stating that many of the academics today, particularly social scientists and sociologists, indoctrinate the nation's youth, mostly into leftist ideologies. They attack free speech, the notion of safe spaces, the introduction of critical knowledge. So instead of looking at history from one perspective, introducing numerous perspectives of history, mostly in terms of multicultural education. They also note that many academics are elitists. They live in the ivory tower, and they don't know about the concerns of everyday people. And although many of these complaints about academia and even sociology can come down to this, that it's opinionated and subjective. In other words, it goes against what Peter Berger is stating, that it is undisciplined. It's undisciplined. It's not studying society in a disciplined way. And this lecture is meant to go against this a little bit and look at the different ways in which sociologists will study society. So we're going to start off with the scientific research method. While the scientific research method is usually thought about in terms of the natural sciences, social scientists, sociologists, psychologists, and so forth, political scientists, they utilize the scientific research method when carrying out their research. So, your role as the social scientist is as follows. You define a problem, particularly a social problem or a social phenomenon. You review the literature. You read a bunch of articles about how other people have studied this problem or phenomenon. You develop a hypothesis or an educated guess about this phenomenon and the problem and the questions that you want to study. You pick a method of analysis, which most of this lecture is based on. What method of analysis are you going to use? You carry out your research. You interpret and analyze your data. And you write and report it, mostly in terms of an article. But the scientific method doesn't usually stop there. This is just your role. But the scientific method and your role is integrated within a larger community of scholars. So after you write and report this, you usually send it off to different scholarly journals who are headed by experts in their field. These individuals read your report. They discuss the report's findings. They determine if the findings of the report and the methods are valid. And if they're valid, they'll most likely publish the report into their journal. And other scholars might read this and attempt to reproduce the experiment that you did or build on it. And I shouldn't just say experiment here, I should say study here. Experiment's one method of studying. So there's different methods of carrying out research for sociologists. Usually there's quantitative, qualitative, and a mixture of both. So quantitative methods are surveys, sampling, and the statistical analysis of those surveys and sampling. Where qualitative methods usually are interviews, observations, participant observations, and then there's other methods that combine both, such as experimentation and comparative analysis. For the purposes of this lecture, especially in regards to time, I only want to look at the survey. And I know that I titled this section, The Survey and Its Discontents. Surveys are quantitative methods of analysis. They're in the form of questionnaires, either sent to whole populations or samples of that population. So we see in the pictures here. The top picture has, check, if you strongly agree with something, agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. This is, in the form of a questionnaire. And on bottom is a picture of a focused study group where you can look at samples of that population. And the results are analyzed and represented statistically. I should also note that when questionnaires are sent out, when questionnaires or study groups are formed, they're formed randomly. They're formed to represent the larger population that you're studying. So in other words, they're not going to send out a questionnaire just to people, just to people of a certain age group or just to a certain people who hold a particular religious belief. They're going to send it out to people who hold multiple religious beliefs, people who are, on multiple ages and things like that. They want these as random as possible. This is really, really important because this is going to give those surveys and the statistical analysis that follows more validity in terms of how much it represents the larger population's beliefs. Surveys can come in, different forms. These are 2 paper forms, but with the rise of the internet, we have numerous different ways to survey different populations. You could also do surveys over the phone, things like that. Now, there's a lot of benefits of surveying. This allows for the study of large groups of people. So you could send out a questionnaire to, hundreds of people, thousands, sometimes even tens of thousands of people. The census works, the United States Census works with large amounts of groups of people, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions. This allows for the standardized questioning of large groups of people. So you're not asking them a variety of different questions, but instead one different question. How likely are you to agree with blank? So it allows for a standardized questioning and a standardized answering of those questions, which then allows for the quantification of responses from these large groups of people. Furthermore, it also provides simplistic results that are easily digestible to the public. So you see lots of these surveys transformed into statistical reports and statistical charts that are usually shown throughout media sources. But there are a lot of problems with statistical methods, the surveys and the statistical analysis. First of all, it's a shallow level of understanding. You're simply asking one question and asking for a concrete answer. Do you strongly agree, or neutral on this, and so forth. So it doesn't provide you much depth. It doesn't provide you the how or why or what questions that, usually showcase that depth of understanding. Those sampled sometimes don't represent the whole, and I talked about this earlier. This can be, are you sampling people from a specific, just from a specific religious denomination, or are you trying to make that sample as random as possible to represent that larger whole? Surveys and sampling sometimes don't showcase the complexity of social life, and I know that in the beginning. That's a shallow level of analysis. People can lie to surveyors or refuse to wholly comply to surveyors, and we have seen lots of problems with people lying or refusing to wholly comply. So think about this. If you were a teenager and the somebody came and did a survey at your school and asked you if you, let's say, did drugs, you might probably say no, because even if you have, because you don't want to get in trouble. But the more recent result, we saw this with the 2016 presidential election. So all the way up until election night, the political forecast or the presidential forecast was this. Hillary Clinton had an 89% chance of winning based upon surveys and statistical analysis, while Donald Trump only had 11%. And the results of that, was that Hillary Clinton was wholly defeated and Donald Trump became president. Below, you see Nate Silver, who's runs the website 538, which looks at a lot of different, I should say, statistical reports and averages them all together. He studies ways in which statistics are formed, and I'm going to show you some of those studies in a little bit, or some examples of that. But even he was wrong in this, while right before this election he was known as the guru, the statistical guru. So, if people lie to surveyors or don't wholly comply, you're going to get, problematic results, as we saw with the 2016 election forecasts. Also, unscientific polls target highly ideological participants to skew results. This is a huge problem with things like Facebook polls, or polls by, very left-leaning or right-leaning websites that ask people who read those websites to do a poll on something. One of the biggest examples was in September 2019, President Trump retweeted a Breitbart poll on impeachment. And Breitbart is a very, very right-leaning news website. And they put a poll on their website, do you stand with President Trump? And 97.83% of the respondents said yes, while only 2.17% said no. There's a lot of problems with this poll. First of all, it's not random. It's directed specifically to Breitbart readers. So people who read Breitbart are most likely conservative. Therefore, they most likely support President Trump. Therefore, they are going to state yes. But also, if you notice on the bottom of that poll, there's a thing that says return to poll, meaning you can click that button and retake that poll. So somebody could take that poll, numerous times, thus skewing the results even more. So there are a lot of different problems with surveys on polling and statistics. Everything from shallow levels of analysis to, people actively manipulating polls to skew the results. But I also, want to look not just at, pitfalls and problems, but also, ways in which surveys are represented. So we usually see surveys in terms of, media analysis, particularly as it relates to politics. And I give two different, polls here on the same topic, one from Fox News and one from CNN. However, if you look at, the Fox News one, and this is both on the impeachment of President Trump in late 2019, the Fox News poll, according to Nate Silver's 538, actually has a pretty good grade. He gave the Fox News poll an A/B. He says that it leans Republican 0.4% of the time, which isn't, great, but it isn't that bad either. And we see here, it's a bar graph that's representing whether or not Trump should be impeached, where 51% of the respondents said yes, he should be impeached and removed, where 4% said impeached but not removed, and another bar, not impeached, 40%. And if we look at the CNN poll, which actually has a lower grade than the 538 poll, and it leans Democrat 0.1%, we see other representations. Instead of a bar graph, we just see numbers, but it's numbers at specific times. So whereas the Fox News poll was taken in early October 2019, This is looking at historically from October, September, May, April, March. And the purpose of this is to showcase that, the support for impeachment for President Trump at this time has been growing nationwide. But as I stated, a lot of the survey results that you see, especially on the news, are going to be very political. They're going to be very, they're going to be very clear cut. Do you support impeachment or not? It's not going to look at a lot of the complexities, and furthermore, it's not going to showcase the whole arsenal of surveys and survey representation. So if we look at this, we see a whole lot of other different ways that surveys can be represented. One of the most shocking polls I've seen is all the way on the left-hand side, wealth by race and ethnicity between 2007 and 2013. And here it's looking at the differences between white, black, and Hispanic households in terms of wealth. And as you're going to learn in future lectures, wealth is defined as one's income plus all of one's assets minus their debt. And as you see in 2013, the average white household had $141,900 of wealth, while the average black household only had $11,000 worth of wealth. Another one that, I'm showing, and again, this is all represented through bar graphs. The middle top, gender pay gap by state in 2015. Here we have a color-coded map looking at this gendered pay gap. On the bottom middle, we have a line graph looking at inequality and life expectancy for women based upon, rich versus poor women. And, as it's showing, especially over time, from 1980 to 2010, this gap has widened where the richest women have a life expectancy of 91.9 and the poorest women have a life expectancy of 78.3. All the way to the right, we have, another type of percentage polls based upon specific questions. So they're asking questions about between rich and poor, who works harder, and they're targeting both Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and they're looking at the percentage of each. So they'll ask a question such as, which has more to do with a person, or which has more to do why a person is rich? And they ask because he or she works harder than others. And you see Republicans stated 57% of the time somebody is rich because they work harder, while only 27% of Democrats stated that they aren't rich because of hard work, or they are rich because of hard work. And independents agreed with that statement 37% of the time. So there's different ways of representing different data as well as different questions to be asking through those representations. However, statistics are always suspect. A lot of people do not trust statistics, and they think that statistics can be manipulated in various different ways, which it can. And this leads me to a quote by Joel Best, who has written extensively on statistics and some of the problems with statistics. And he states, statistics have a bad reputation. We suspect that statistics may be wrong, that people who use statistics may be lying, trying to manipulate us by using numbers to somehow distort the truth. Yet at the same time, we need statistics. We depend upon them to summarize and clarify the nature of our complex society. This is particularly true when we talk about social problems. So, Joel Best says statistics are flawed yet needed. So his advice is, let's make polls stronger. Let's make, surveying and statistical analysis stronger. And he notes, don't ignore statistics or assume that every number is false. In other words, do not give up on statistics. Instead, we as citizens need to be better judges of statistics and their numerical contents. We need to be thoughtful and more critical. We need to critically assess and know the complexities of statistics as well as know their limitations. We need to be critical assessors, that know statistics are a product of choices and that results are a compromise among many choices. And we need to know that while knowing statistics are flawed, we need to focus on whether or not those flaws are enough to damage the study's usefulness. And finally, we need to, constantly ask questions about statistics, how they are gathered and how they are presented. In other words, we have to be better critical thinkers when it comes to statistics, because the more we critically think about statistics, the better they will become. Because statistics are nothing but people's responses to specific questions designed by specific people. In other words, statistics are a social construction. They aren't truth, they aren't true, they aren't false, in reality, in objective reality. Instead, they are a social construction. We also want to, be careful about, statistics in and of themselves. As I just noted, they are only a social construction. Therefore, we shouldn't take them at their word. And a lot of people get so engulfed in statistics, surveys, and statistical analysis that they, think that those numbers speak for themselves. And they think that statistics in and of themselves are sociology. So I want to close this section with another quote from Peter Berger. He states that statistical data by themselves do not make sociology. They become sociology only when they are sociologically interpreted, put within a theoretical frame of reference that is sociological. Simply counting or even correlating different items that one counts is not sociology. This does not mean that the data this does not mean that the data in these studies are not true or they cannot be relevant to sociological understanding. They are, taken by themselves, the raw materials that can be used in a sociological interpretation. The interpretation, however, must be broader than the data itself. So statistics, as well as any other method of analysis, whether it's interview, participant observation, is only one piece of the pie when you are doing sociological research. Now I want to move on to another part, and this is concerns to assess when undertaking a sociological study. So we have to be concerned, we have to take into account numerous different things when carrying out such studies. First of all, will the method of analysis I choose be valid and reliable, or will it produce, let's say, valid and reliable results? Reliable, as noted, is defined as the degree to which a question and procedure produces the same result multiple times, and valid is the degree to which a question and procedure provides an accurate result as to the measure. So that's the first thing. Is the method going to produce something that's valid and reliable? Second, will the method of analysis I am choosing be representative of the social phenomenon I wish to study? So representative, where the sample or part studied accurately represents the whole, and does it? Does surveying represent what you want to study? Or would interviewing be more effective, or a participant observation, or an experiment? Will the method of analysis correlate to the theoretical framework I wish to take in studying a social phenomenon? So remember the theoretical approaches and frameworks that we've gone over, before in earlier lectures: symbolic interactionism, functionalism, conflict theory. How do each relate to one another? And how would, let's say a survey, be shaped and represented through a conflict theory's account? Next, do I have the resources to carry out my desired method of analysis? So surveys are extremely, especially large scale surveys are extremely resource intensive. Lots of money, lots of time, and lots of staffing need to go into it. Same thing with experiments. Participant observations. Sometimes people will go and move to a certain community for years and study that community. That's a lot of time, and lost opportunities to do that study. So, do you have the resource to carry out the particular method of analysis that you want to carry out? Do I have the informed consent of those I wish to research? So informed consent is defined, as following. Do those you wish to study agree to participate in that study? And if that answer is no, then you don't have their informed consent. And if you study them anyway, then that's unethical. So also, are you being deceptive to the individuals and groups you wish to study about what your study is really about? So are you telling them one thing but actually doing another? Are you being deceitful? If you are, that is not informed consent. And will my study and methods induce direct or indirect harm on those individuals or groups I wish to study? Are you keeping all data on individuals and groups confidential? Are you providing your findings to groups that are looking to actively harm those individuals and groups studied? So you could look at, different studies, let's say carried out in World War II, either by the Nazis or the Japanese, in terms of studying particular individuals in order to do harm to those larger groups. And is your study actively harming those involved in it? You could think about the United States study on the Tuskegee experiments, and how that negatively impacted large groups of African American through them saying that to these African American participants that they were cured of syphilis when they weren't. And some other experiments where they actively gave people, particularly prisoners, I know in South America, certain diseases, and watched how those diseases played out. So is your study actively harming those involved? So you need to be very concerned not only with the theoretical implications of your studies, but the resource implications as well as the ethical implications of the study of analysis that you wish to study. So now let's move to some closing remarks. There are problems with sociology. So if we go back all the way to the beginning to the critics of sociology, and even on a little larger scale, academia, there are problems. First of all, sociology, any type of method that you take on is going to be subjective in some way or another, despite the call for objectivity. So meaning, subjective, your personal biases, your values, your assumptions about the world are going to play some part in your study, in the types of methods you choose to study, in your interpretation of the data, in your larger analysis. It's all going to take, part. It is impossible to be totally objective in this. Objective means value-free. So that is one problem with sociological studies and even studies in general. Numerous scholars have pointed out how even in natural sciences, there are, problems with objective claims in a lot of the natural science studies that have been carried out for hundreds of years. Also, another problem with sociology is the Hawthorne effect, and that is, sociologists influencing the behavior of their participants. So let's say you're observing a large group of people. Just by you being there observing them is going to influence the behavior of those people in some way or another. But these problems, are dealt with. They're acknowledged by sociologists and they're dealt with. And what we need to do is acknowledging and reflecting on our own social positions and biases when carrying out these studies. Acknowledging and reflecting on our own role in the participants' behavior. Acknowledging and reflecting on anything else that might impact the study. So the best way to deal with such problems is to acknowledge and reflect on them, not only internally but also externally with the written reports that we write. So I want to go back to the the biggest critiques is sociology opinion, and I would state no. And despite problems, it's a means of studying society through different theoretical lenses and with different methodological tools in a disciplined and organized manner. So where there are problems, where you might not agree with everything that a sociological study states, it's still somebody's disciplined, organized study of a specific problem. And now, as a good sociologist, you don't just want to say, about a study, oh, that study is horrible, but go try to reproduce it or go try to do a study on your own. I hope this has shed some light on, different sociological methods and the ways in which, sociologists organize different studies. And I will see you in the next lecture. Goodbye.